What's going on YouTube? Steel Orange here, and today we are going to be talking about a couple different topics that were requested. So the first topic that I'm going to be talking about is counter building, and the second topic that I'm going to be talking about is what not to build together. And so I'm going to spend most of the time in this video talking about counter building, just because that's sort of a more in-depth topic that I can talk about a little more. And the second one I'm going to touch on just briefly at the end of the video. So if I'm going to try to remember to put the timestamp in the description of when I start talking about the second part of the video in case you're only interested in listening to that part. But I'm going to start with counter building. And so basically there's not really a step-by-step recipe on like how to counter build. Like, if you want to counter build other people, this is how you do it, But there are a few items that I want to talk about that are often, basically there's two kinds of items in Smite. There's kinds of items that you build based on the character that you're playing and what you want to do, and then there's items that you build to counter what other people are doing. So I'm going to talk a bit about those second type of items and give some examples of items that you would use as counter building and talk about the scenario that you would use them in. Just kind of give you an idea of what things you're thinking about when you're looking at counter building the other team. So to start, I want to talk about a couple offensive items. To start, let me go to a physical god. I'm going to talk about Brawler's Beat Stick. So one of the most powerful things that you can have on your team in this meta is healing. Healing is very, very strong in this meta, and a lot of teams are picking healing compositions at the highest level. And so it's very important not to ignore healing if there's a lot of healing on the other team, because that can be really, really difficult to deal with. And so building anti-heal, healing reduction, whenever you're playing against another team that has a healer, especially if it's somebody who heals themselves and the team around them. For example, Guan Yu or Sylvanas or Ra are three of the big in-meta healers right now. You want to make sure that you're building anti-healing, and you want to make sure your whole team is doing that, because it's very, very, very important to make sure you shut down this healing. And so Brawler's Beat Stick is one example of a great item that you can use to counter healing, especially if you're a very offensive character like an assassin or something like that. And even a hunter could build this if they wanted to, where you're looking to build a lot of damage, but you still want to reduce the healing of the other team. Brawler's Beat Stick is a great option for that. There's also on the magical side, you can build Divine Ruin. It's a power and life steal item that also reduces healing that the other team gets. And then on the defensive side, you can build Pestilence as another option. It's a magical defense item that reduces the healing regeneration of the other team as well. So this is one thing that you're looking at when you're counter building, is does the other team have a lot of healing, and how can I shut that down? Because again, if you just ignore the other team's healing and don't try to counter build that at all, then it's going to be really devastating, especially in the late game when their healing abilities are maxed out and they're just pumping out the healing over and over and over again. And every time you get in a fight, it seems like they're healing up faster than you can damage them. So it's very important to make sure that you counter that aspect of a team's composition. Another thing I want to talk about is penetration. Oops, didn't mean to do that. So penetration is something that you're going to put in a build if you're any sort of damaging character. So if you're a hunter, a mage, or an assassin, basically, you're pretty much always going to have some form of penetration in your build, because otherwise you're just not really going to do any damage. But in particular, I want to draw attention to the two, I think, like highest penetration items in the game. There's Titan's Bane, which gives 33% physical penetration, so this is the physical version. And then on the magical side, there's Obsidian Shard, which has the same passive. You gain 33% magical penetration. And so these are like the strongest penetration items, especially for targets with a lot of penetration. So if you find that a team is building really tanky, like let's say they have like a Guardian and 2 Warriors on their team or something like that, or they're just building a lot of defense and you're having trouble breaking through those frontline characters, and it seems like you're not doing any damage to them, Titan's Bane and Obsidian Shard are two of the best items to sort of crack through that defense and start doing damage to the tanks. Now again, these are items that you would probably build on high damage characters anyway, but it's just something to keep in mind if you're not building that and you're having trouble getting through the other team's defense. These are good go-to items to deal with that issue. Okay, on the defensive side of things, let's go. Okay, so the first thing to keep in mind when you're building defensively is what kind of damage on the other team you're most worried about. Are you worried about their physical damage or their magical damage, or both? So for example, in the solo lane, a very typical first item to build after boots is Breastplate of Valor. It's a strong defense item. It gives you cooldown reduction, a little bit of mana. But let's say, for example, you're in the solo lane and you're laning against an Aphrodite, right? Aphrodite's a magical character and a healer, so you're not really like the physical protection doesn't do you any good. So you want to build something magical, with magical protection, like for example a pestilence, because that's going to give you, I think, let's go look at it. It gives you 80 magical protection, some health, and also reduces Aphrodite's healing. So this is a great way of counter building Aphrodite because she's a magical character and she relies a lot on her healing, and so you can shut both of those things down with this item. Another great counter building item. I forget what it's called. It's called. Wait, am I in physical characters? I have to go to magical characters. Oops. Is called Helm of something or other. It's called Celestial Legion Helm. That's what it's called. Right here. So this is a great item to build if you're really worried about the other team building into crit chance. So let's say the other team has a hunter and also Mercury or something like that. So these are multiple characters that are probably going to build into crit damage, and it's going to be really devastating in the late game. So what Celestial Legion Helm does is it not only gives you some physical protection, but it also prevents every 6 seconds, it prevents the next hit of a critical strike against you and gives you plus 40 magical power when that happens. So basically, if a character like Mercury relies on hitting a crit on you, that's going to hit you for like 800 damage, and it prevents that critical strike. That's an insane amount of damage that Mercury is losing. It can really give you an edge on him and be able to survive that sort of one-shot or two-shot potential that a lot of these critical strike characters have. So that's an example of a specific thing that the other team has that you might want to counter build. Another great counter building item, and sort of a great item in general, that a lot of people build anyway, and it's just an awesome all-around item, is Winged Blade. So Winged Blade is the item that you build when you want to counter if the other team has a lot of slows. If you're really getting shut down by slows, you just notice that the other team has a lot of slows, and you want something that's going to help you survive that. Winged Blade is fantastic because not only does it give you a little bit of health and crowd control reduction, which are just great stats, and some movement speed, but its passive is when you get hit by a slow, the slow every 30 seconds, once every 30 seconds, when you get hit by a slow, the slow doesn't affect you and your movement speed is actually increased by 20%. So let's say you're playing a really immobile mage, like Zeus, for example, and the other team has a Nemesis, right? Nemesis relies on slowing you and then slowing you again and then slowing you again, and you're Zeus, you don't move really, so you're kind of screwed if you get Nemesis ulted and then she slice and dices you and you're like 60% slowed or something like that. But if you have Winged Blade on, now all of a sudden when she does that to you, you're increasing your movement speed by 20%. So this kind of really counters that aspect of the other team. It allows you to get out of a lot of situations where otherwise the slows might be devastating to you. So that's a great item to look at. Another thing that you can look at when you're counter building is attack speed reduction. There are a few items in the game that offer attack speed reduction. I'm just going to list them off. I'm not going to go through them all. But Witchblade, Runic Shield, Frostbound Hammer, and Midgardian Mail are all very good at countering characters that heavily rely on auto-attacking rather. So let's say the other team has, for instance, a Rama in the duo lane and a Mercury or a Kali or something like that in the jungle, and like an Erlang Shen in the solo lane, right? These are a lot of characters on one team that all really heavily rely on auto-attacking often and very quickly. And so the best way to counter that is to reduce their attack speed so they can't auto-attack as often. And so buying any of these items will allow you to reduce the amount of auto-attacks they get often, is a great counter to that. It should be noted, though, that attack speed reduction caps out at, I believe, 30%. So you don't want to be building like 3 of these items altogether because they're going to become useless. But 1 or 2 of them is going to be very, very strong at dealing with heavy auto-attacking team comp. All right, I already talked about Pestilence. Okay, the next item that I want to talk about, or 2 items, I guess, are Spirit Robe and Mantle of Discord. So these are 2 awesome defense items that you don't have to be counter building somebody to build these items, because they're just really, really strong items in general. And anytime you want to build a defensive item on a character, both of these are really strong choices. But in particular, I want to talk about some of the situations where these items can excel even more than normal. And that's when you're facing against teams that have a lot of crowd control and lockdown potential, and they rely on hitting you with some sort of stun or chaining together a bunch of stuns and mesmerizes and taunts and hard crowd control like that, and then bursting you down in one shot, and you can't do anything about it because they're always just they crowd control you and then just blow all their damage on you, and you're just dead before you can do anything, right? So Spirit Robe is great at handling this. Not only does it give you 20% crowd control reduction, so you're not crowd controlled as long, it gives you 40 physical and magical protection, so it helps you deal against both types of damage. And then its passive is that once every 15 seconds, after you get hit with a hard crowd control effect, you get 15% damage mitigation for 3 seconds. So this is an insane passive, and here's why. If you build defense, that's damage mitigation of a sort, but it can be countered when the other team builds penetration, right? So if you have 60 defense, but the other team has 40 penetration, they're sort of negating 40 of your defense, right? But with 15% pure damage mitigation, that's not affected by penetration at all. So whatever damage number the other team would have done to you in that next 3 seconds, it just cuts it by 15%, regardless of how much penetration they have. So this is a fantastic item to deal with if you're getting bursted down and locked down by a lot of crowd control. Another item that kind of helps the same situation is Mantle of Discord. Mantle of Discord gives you 60 physical and magical protection, so even a little bit more magical protection than Spirit Robe. And then its passive is that if you take damage below 30% health, you unleash a shockwave that stuns all enemies within a range of 20 units for 1 second, and you gain CC immunity for 1 second. So this is great because if a team is locking you down a lot and trying to burst you down, now they can only do that until they get to 30% health, and then whatever crowd control they had on you is cleansed, so you're free to move and do whatever you want now, so they can't burst you all the way to 0, and it also stuns everybody around you for 1 second, so it gives you a brief moment to sort of collect yourself and get out of there before they continue like raining down all their abilities on you. This is another way to sort of prevent that lockdown burst type of composition that you might run into a lot. Alright, and the last counter building item that I want to bring attention to, and I think a criminally underused item, is, actually it's up here, no wait, where did I put it? Oh, maybe it's a physical item. I'm pretty sure it's a physical item. It is Ancile. So Ancile or Ancile or however you whatever you want to call it. Pretty sure it's not pronounced Ancile, but you can call it that too if you want. Has gone through a lot of changes over the last couple seasons. It used to be a health item, and before that I think it was like a stacking item. I don't even remember. But now it has, I think, one of the most interesting passives in the game and a very useful one. And so just to go over its stats real quick, it has 25 physical power, 60% magical protection, so this is great against mages already. And then its passive makes it even better, where it says when you take magical damage from an enemy ability, you unleash a shockwave that silences all enemies within a range of 30 units for 1 second. This cannot trigger more than once every 60 seconds. So Ancile is great at countering magical characters that rely on getting in your face and bursting you down in a very short amount of time. So the best character that I can think of, and one of the ranked community in particular's least favorite characters to face, is Ao Kuang. Ao Kuang gets banned almost every game because people just don't know how to deal with him. When he gets to late game, he can just insta-kill basically any squishy target on the map and then go back in the fight and just kill more people, right? But the problem with Ao Kuang is that in order to do any damage to you, he has to be right on top of you, and he has to throw all his abilities at you, one after the other really quickly, right? So Ancile does a great job of countering this because not only it gives you the magical protection, but, let's say Ao Kuang blinks on top of you and then leads by attacking you with his third ability, right? His Kona attack. He's going to get that damage off, but then he's going to be silenced, meaning that he can't follow up with either his one or his ultimate. So now he can't execute you, because normally what he's going to do is blink in, use his 3 on you, and then execute you right away, right? So now he can't execute you, so it gives you a second to get away. And he also can't escape because he can't use his dash, his 1, or whatever, dash or teleport, whatever you want to call it. So, he comes in, he uses his ability on you, and then he's just basically stuck and can't do anything for a second. And so it really shuts down his ability to blink into the back line and explode a character before anybody knows what happened. Because that's what Ao Kuang is so good at, and why everybody's afraid of him, because he can just explode a character before they know what happened. And with Ancile, this is a great counter to that. So that's just, one last item that you can use to counter build that specific scenario. And there are more items. These are the ones that I'm going to talk about today, but there are more items that you can use to counter build. But I hope that this gave you some good examples of ways you can counter build different situations, and kind of gives you an idea of the different things that you're thinking about in I can't speak English. Sort of how you want to approach your build, and what you want to be thinking about when you're trying to counter build certain things. What things you're looking out for that you can counter build against, and just give yourself the best chance of winning with your build. Okay, so that's it for counter building. If you have any questions or comments, or any other ways of counter building that you have used that you want to suggest, or if you have any other questions, please leave a comment, of course. For now, I'm going to start going into what not to build together. This was the other topic that was requested. So there's not a lot of items in this game that like you can't build together, for the most part. I mean, there's some things that you just wouldn't build together because the characters that you would build them on are just very different. So like, for example, you're not really going to build Sovereignty and Soul Reaver together, because if you're building Sovereignty, you're basically playing a support player and you're building all tankiness and you're not building any damage. So like, why would you build Soul Reaver, right? But it's not like those two items specifically hurt each other, So I'm not really going to talk about that kind of situation, but what I am going to talk about is there are a couple combinations of items that are not necessarily bad together, but are inefficient together. And while you can build them, there's usually a better option than building these sets of items together. So the first combination of items that I'm going to talk about is the Frost Talus build. And what this means, Frost Talus is the name for any build where you're building Frostbound Hammer, which is this item right here, and Hasten Fatalis, which I'll go to in a second, in the same build. So what Frostbound Hammer does is every time you auto attack an enemy, it reduces their movement speed and also their attack speed. But for this case, we're just worried about their movement speed reduction by 30%. And what Hasten Fatalis does is every time you auto attack a target, the attack speed or the movement speed debuff that you get from auto attacking is removed for 1 second, right? So they both accomplish the same purpose, but in different ways. Hasten Fatalis allows you to stick to a target because you're not slowed down by auto-attacking. And Frostbound Hammer allows you to stick to another target because every time you auto-attack them, they're slowed, so you can stick to them pretty easily. So both of these accomplish the same purpose, and they're both good items on certain types of characters. But building them both on the same character is overkill, because they both accomplish the same purpose and you're just doing it twice, right? So let's say you're playing Bakasura, right? Bakasura is a character where people will sometimes build Frost Talus. And you will see this build. It's kind of a troll build, an annoying build, and it can be useful if you're just like pub stomping or you're having fun. But there are more efficient ways to build it. So let's say you're playing Bakasura and you build Hasten Fatalis, which is a really common item on Bakasura, and then you build Frostbound Hammer. Now, there is definitely, anytime you get on top of an enemy and start auto-attacking them, they're not going to get away from you, right? Because you're slowing them and speeding yourself up, and you're going to stick to them, right? But even if you just built one of those items, like if you just built Hasten Fatalis or you just built Frostbound Hammer, you're still going to stick to them because you're moving at the same speed as them for the most part. So there are other items basically that extra item that you're using to stick to them even more. There are other items that you could fill in with that slot that could give you that could be a more efficient use of that spot. It's going to offer you more than just giving you something that you already have. So, for example, let's say you're playing like Vamana is the common character to build Frostbound Hammer on, right? So let's say you built Frostbound Hammer and then you want to build. Actually, this isn't a good example. Let's talk about Kali. This is a better example. Kali is a very common character to build Hasten Fatalis on. She relies on auto attack speed and sticking to characters to be able to auto attack them a lot. So let's say you've already built Hasten Fatalis, and then you want to build Frostbound Hammer for even more sticking to them ability. Well, you don't really need that because Kali has Hasten Fatalis, which is going to let her stick to people when she's auto attacking. She also has a stun and a leap, so like you're not getting away from Kali. So instead of building Frostbound Hammer, what you can build instead is, let's say, Kin Size. Kin Size is going to give you more attack speed, some physical power, and a passive that makes every auto attack deal an additional 4% of the target's maximum health and damage, right? So this is a much stronger item to fill that spot. It's going to give you more damage because you're going to be sticking to them anyway. And so rather than throwing another item in there to do it like you already can do, you're going to have an item that increases the amount of damage that you're doing. So it's going to be a more efficient use of that slot. So that's just an example. Again, people will build Frost Talus, and they may have some success with it sometimes, and it can be very, very annoying. But if you really want to focus on making the most efficient builds, it is better to avoid building these two items together. And at the top level, you're not going to see people building these items together unless they're just trolling or trying to just screw around. Okay, next two items that I want to talk about are Executioner and Titan's Bane. So Titan's Bane, we talked about a little bit earlier in the video, has a passive that gives you 33% physical penetration. Very, very high percentage-based physical penetration. And the Executioner has a passive that basic attacks against an enemy reduce your target's physical penetration by 12% for 3 seconds. So, and this maxes out at 3 stacks. So when you max this out, you're getting 36% physical penetration, right? So these two items kind of do the same thing, but the reason that they're not super efficient together is because you want Titan's Bane. Titan's Bane's 33% physical penetration comes after Executioners, basically. So if you have both of these items built on, let's say you're attacking a target rather, that has 33%, or not, sorry, not 30. Let's say you're attacking a target that has 100 physical protection, right? So if you just had Titan's Bane built, that would have 33% physical penetration, so you would reduce their protections to 77%. And then let's say you paired that Titan's Bane with some flat penetration, like for example, a Jotun's Wrath and a Brawler's Beatstick, right? So now you're reducing that 77 down by another 30, and you're bringing that down to, I can't do math, 47 physical defense, right? Whereas if you build Executioner in Titan's Bane, you're still going to get both of those reductions, but the Executioner's comes on, or is used first, right? So basically, Executioner, you're going to stack it 3 times and bring their penetration, or their protection rather, down to 64%, right? And then you're going to get the 33% penetration from the Titan's Bane, right? But it's not going to be 33% of 100 physical protection. It's going to be 33% of 64, I think I said, physical protection, right? So now that Titan's Bane, where previously the 33% reduced the target's physical protection by 33 protections, now it's only going to reduce their protection by like 21 or 22, I think, physical protection, right? So these are still good, right? Because you're still going to get their protections down to somewhere around 40 something, but it's not as efficient because the Executioner, its main thing is giving you that protection shred. Whereas if instead you paired the Titan's Bane with like Brawler's Beatstick and Jotun's Wrath, you're still getting that penetration down to the same amount, but you're also getting 80 physical power and some cooldown reduction and healing reduction and mana, and there's just a lot more that you're getting to along with it for still getting that same amount of physical protection. So both of these items are very, very good. Executioner is a very good item, especially on auto-attacking characters like Hunters, and Titan's Bane is a very, very good item on ability-based characters, and even on Hunters sometimes too. But it can be often tempting to sort of pair them together when you're sort of looking for one last penetration item to round out your build. And again, it's not a bad choice. You can do a lot of damage very, very successfully with Executioner and Titan's Bane built, but it's not the most efficient option. And so it may be worth looking into finding another item to fill that last slot rather than pairing these two together that might give you a little bit more out of like efficiency out of the items that you're building. Okay, and then the last thing that I want to talk about is stacking, in particular double stacking. So when I talk about stacking, it's any item like, what's an example? Like Transcendence is an item. Let me go find Transcendence. Actually I just went past it. Okay. So anytime you have an item where killing enemies gives you a stack, and a stack might give you power or mana or lifesteal or whatever. There are lots of different types of stacking items in the game. It could give you more defense. These are always going to be these items are going to give you a very slow start, because in general, stacking items are very, very expensive, because when you reach your maximum amount of stacks, they're extremely powerful items. So the cost of the item has to reflect that. However, when you first buy the item, you're not getting that full effect, right? So they start out as very, very weak items for very, very high cost, right? So it's taking longer to get your build online for a weak item. But then once you reach the late game, they're very, very strong, right? So Transcendence is one of the highest, actually I think it's the highest power, like physical power item in the game when it comes to late game. But early on, it's a very slow start because you're spending 2,600 gold just to get 35 physical power. When you could instead buy, that's not what I went to. When instead you could buy, where's the boots? You could buy Warrior Tabby. If I can find any boots anywhere, that'd be great. No, not that one. You can buy Warrior Tabby for only 1,550 gold and get 40 physical power and 18 movement speed, right? So you're getting more power, and, there are other things that Transcendence gives, but you're spending like twice as much for that item and getting a little bit less to start, right? So that's why stacking items are generally going to give you a slow start, because you're basically paying now for what you're going to get later. So later it's going to be great. Now it's going to suck, right? Which is okay. And stacking items can certainly be built in this meta. You know, Transcendence is very buildable item. Book of Thoth on the magical side can be built. Doom Orb can be built on some characters in some situations. Warlock Sash can be built on some characters in some situations. So it's not. I'm not saying don't build stacking items, but it should be noted that in this particular meta, especially, it's very dependent on early game pressure and getting a good early start. So when you build stacking items early, you're sort of giving up that early pressure. And sometimes on some characters, like I said, you can get away with building one stacking item and you're going to be okay and you're going to reach the late game quick enough. But when you build two stacking items, you're sort of setting yourself so far behind because it's taking so long to get these items online because they cost so much gold, and you're not getting the benefit of those items until 10, 15, 20 minutes later into the game. So this can put you so far behind that even though those items are really powerful in the late game, by the time you get to the late game, the game's already over because the team is snowballed off of their early pressure that they got. And, you know, you're finally finishing your stacks at 30 minutes when the other team is pushing down your last Phoenix and trying to kill your Titan. And it's like, well, you know, this didn't really work out. So stacking is okay. Double stacking, some people might do it. I wouldn't suggest it, especially in this meta that's so early game based. I think it's going to put you very far behind. It's a very slow start, and I think there are better options. So, you know, some characters are very important to stack on. You know, like Kukulkan, you want to have Book of Thoth. You know, it's key item on him, right? But don't go on Kukulkan and build Book of Thoth and Warlock Sash and Doom Orb and be like, you know, I'm going to be so powerful in the late game. Well, yeah, you're going to be real powerful in 55 minutes when the game's already ended and you've started your next game on a different character because the other team snowballed off of their early lead. So, those are just a couple examples of things not to build together. And again, all these things are things that you can do. They're just not the most efficient or the ideal ways to build. You can get away with them, but they're just not what I'd suggest. There are probably other examples of items that don't synergize perfectly together. Those are the most obvious ones that I could think of. But for the most part, when you're thinking about building, you really want to think about what your character's strengths are, and what items augment that. And then also, like I talked about earlier in the video, what the other team's strengths are, what they're going to cause problems for you, or what they're going to do that's going to cause a problem for you, and how you can counter build those problems. So yeah, as far as building, that's pretty much all I got for today. Thanks for watching. Again, if you liked the video, please hit that like button and subscribe. If you have any comments or questions, or if you have another suggestion of a video that you want to see or a certain god that you want to see a gameplay of, don't hesitate to let me know in the comments. I will make that happen. And as always, go ahead and please check out my Twitch channel at twitch.tv/steelorange3398. That's where I'm filming this now. And real quick, I want to give a shout out to the person who recommended this. Thank you to Eric View for requesting this video. And yeah, thanks for watching, guys. Steel Orange out.